I think we do. So General Statute 138A15 mandates that the chair inquires as to whether any member knows of any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to the matters before the Environmental Management Commission, Groundwater, and Wastewater Management Committee. If there are any members that know of a conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict, please state so at this time. Members? Having heard none, Attorney, we don't see that anyone objects here having a conflict of interest. If I could inquire of you, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have that you have 6 members. I don't see Dr. Lyerly online like he was previously, but I believe there's 6 members in the room who are members of this committee.
Fantastic, fantastic. I know there is one action item, so having a quorum is important to this meeting. I think one of our first action, if I'm correct, is we need to approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting of January the 10th. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
That one moved. You got a second by Mr. Yarborough. Any discussion as it would relate to the minutes? Any changes or anything anyone sees in that? Okay, having heard none, can I get a vote to accept the minutes as written? All in aye, say aye. Anyone opposed? Fantastic. So we've done that quite well. So I'm going to ask Director Scott, if you will. I think you do have an action item here. Can you help us, Michael, with moving this along?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Reardon. As stated, we do have an action item before the committee today requesting approval to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission with the 2024 periodic review of 15A NCAC 02T, specifically section 1500 of those rules, which are about soil remediation. And Jessica Monte with the Division of Waste Management will be presenting, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Welcome, Jessica. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, the members of the committee. So the first few slides are basically the same slides that you saw presented by Karen Higgins earlier in the Water Quality Committee meeting, so I won't go into too much detail. This is the missing piece from the approval that she got for the existing rules for subchapter 02T. This is section 1500 specifically. So the agency is determining whether these rules in section 1500 are necessary or unnecessary. And they go through the public comment process and then send them to the RRC for review. And the RRC prepares that final determination report, and then it goes through to the legislature for that final determination approval. So this is an overview of all of the rules that come through the Groundwater and Waste Management Committee from the Division of Waste Management that you're going to be seeing over the next few years in this rule review process. So what's coming before you today is that first set of rules, the 02T 1500. And the remaining rules on this slide are the rules that are under the underground storage tank section. These rules that are before you today, they govern they're administered by the underground storage tank section, and they govern the sites that are permitted for the remediation of petroleum contaminated soil, which are usually dedicated land farms or containment and treatment facilities. These are the other rules under the other sections in the Division of Waste Management, Hazardous Waste, Solid Waste, and Superfund that will be coming to you at a later date. The dry cleaning rules are expected to come before you at your May meeting, just as a heads up. All 7 of the rules in this section we are categorizing as necessary. And the report that you saw attached did not include sections 100 through 1400 of subchapter 02T. Those were provided by Karen Higgins earlier. We're going to be combining those, the 100 through 1400 with 1500 into one report to go before the EMC, the full EMC, and then go through the public comment process. So here's just a overview of what the report looks like. It's also in the attachment. I'm just showing that we are determining right now, showing what the last action of that rule is. These rules last completed their readoption process, becoming effective in January 2018. As I mentioned, they're all designated as necessary, and they have they're required to implement or conform to federal regulation, and then the federal regulation is quoted in the report too. This is the review timeline, the same as the one Karen presented earlier, since it will be combined into the same report for all of subchapter 02T. So going to the EMC for approval, OAH, go through the 60-day public comment period, adoption by the full EMC, the RRC, and then going to the legislature after that. So our request is for approval to proceed to the EMC to go to public comment with the rules review report initial determinations for 15A NCAC 02T section 1500.
And I take it there were no rules that you decided that was not necessary of that
That's correct.
group of
They're
rules?
all necessary.
Okay, any questions? See none? Can I get a motion to approve these to go forward?
I make the motion. This is Commissioner Bailey to proceed to the EMC with the rules review report, initial determinations for 15A NCAC .02T, section 1500.
Fantastic. Thank you for the motion. Can I get a second? Have a second by Commissioner Baumgartner. Any discussion on this item? Having heard none, can I get a vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say like sign. Motion carries unanimous. Great job, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Scott. Director Scott, I think that is the only action item, as I understand, on this agenda today. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Fantastic. I think you do have some informational stuff you'd like to share with us. Again, PFAS will be the thing that we will be dealing with for decades to come. I think we also have Jessica's going to give us an update as it would relate to groundwater quality standards. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. Jessica Monte will present on the PFAS groundwater quality standards rulemaking front, provide an update to the committee. This is for the North Carolina 2L groundwater quality standards development as it relates to PFAS, following up on the 2B standards that the previous committee heard.
Fantastic. So welcome again, Jessica. You
Thank
are
you
the
again.
one in the middle today, right?
That's all
So
good.
share with us some good information.
Okay, so first we wanted to just provide some background on how the groundwater quality standards are developed and established. So per the rule that is quoted in the bottom left corner there, they are established as the least of the items listed there, the systemic non-cancer threshold, the concentration which corresponds to lifetime cancer risk, taste threshold value, odor threshold limit value, maximum contaminant level, and the national secondary drinking water standard. So the rule would require when you're establishing groundwater quality standard that it be the least of those items. So for this PFAS rulemaking, the relevant requirements are those first two, the cancer and non-cancer thresholds. Also providing just a reminder and update on the requirements in the rule that pertain to standards that are not naturally occurring. The rule states that they are not permitted in concentrations at or above the practical quantitation limit, or the PQL. Also, the rule states that where the an established standard for a substance is less than the PQL, the detection of that substance at or above the PQL is a violation of the standard. Some additional background on previously proposed PFOA and PFOS standards. Back in 2020, the EMC proposed a total PFOA and PFOS standard of 70 micrograms per liter, or PPT. That was based on the EPA's 2016 Drinking Water Health Advisory. That went out to public comment, and some of the public comments received requested a lower PFOA, PFOS standard. So in November 2021, EMC did not end up adopting the PFOA and PFOS standard that was proposed. And the hearing officer at the time acknowledged there were ongoing studies and that DEQ was committed to continue evaluating developing science and newly published data on PFAS compounds. So this table is showing the draft PFAS groundwater quality standards that we are working on for O2L and those 8 standards that are the 8 PFAS that are listed. We also provided on the table some PQLs that EPA published in their economic analysis for the proposed national primary drinking water regulation, which is also draft. So we also,
So question for you.
yes.
How does what you just showed us there compare to the 70 that was previously that the committee didn't approve?
As in numerically, so that the PFOS is 0.7 and the PFOA is 0.001, also micrograms per liter. So they are lower than was originally proposed, as was requested in the comments that were provided during that public comment period. And it's also not a total combined standard. It's a separate standard for each constituent.
compound?
Yeah. This is the implementation timeline for our plan to address PFAS contamination in groundwater, whether that's under the existing standard that is the PQL or under the proposed standards if they become effective, or when they become effective, if approved by this, by the commission. This is the same timeline that we showed at the January 2024 Groundwater and Waste Management Committee meeting, no changes. And this is also the timeline that we showed to stakeholders during the stakeholder meetings.
One second there.
Mhm.
I know, Director Scott, we had talked about on these stakeholder meetings, are we going where they are, or are we asking them to come see us? Where would these stakeholder meetings during the 2024 be held? In the communities most affected by this, or?
We had the meetings already,
Right.
and they were via, we had them virtual and then also allowed for people to come join us in Raleigh. We had 3 meetings, and I'll have a summary slide for that in a moment, but
Okay.
that's what we did for the 3 meetings that we've had to this point. I don't know if Michael wanted to add anything to that.
I would just add, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We did discuss with our water resource colleagues, if it's the commission's, purview to take this out to public comment, then we've discussed, where statewide public hearings would occur, or what that would look like. We shared that feedback from you with our other colleagues. So obviously, we're at the point of, not yet proposing this as an action item. Once it comes as an action item and the commission makes a final decision on the next step, that includes public comment, then we have already discussed your feedback on taking it, a broader reach across the state than just meetings in Raleigh.
Yeah, that's really my concern. I'd like to go where the people who are dealing with this are, so we can hear from them directly the impact this is having on their lives. That's my thoughts.
Very good.
Thank you, Jessica.
Mhm. So as mentioned, we did hold 3 stakeholder meetings, January 22nd, February 8th, and 22nd, to go over the groundwater quality standards that we were proposing for O2L. We did show them the same slides that we showed to this committee in January, but we added that slide with the table of the proposed standards so that they could see where we were going with that. And we held the 3 meetings just to accommodate different areas of focus and people's schedules, but the same information was presented at every meeting. So this is the list of stakeholder groups that were invited to participate. We thought it was a good mix of local government organizations and private industry and environmental consultants, and also the Department of Ag and the Farm Bureau.
Yes, question?
Have you thought about asking the Department of Insurance?
I'll defer to Michael on that.
Yeah, the Department of Insurance, personal coverage, property casualty, health insurance, all of that, they're seeing for the last 18 to 24 months in actuary tables considering PFAS as something that is going to affect their coverage and premiums, not just through North Carolina, but through other states. So I thought it would be interesting to see on our cost piece how the Department of Insurance sees PFAS. I just thought.
Great question,
Yeah.
Commissioner King. Other comments from? Yes, Commissioner Gibson.
Yes, I'm wondering, just looking ahead on the implementation plan timeline, how you'll go about identifying sites with exceedances of the groundwater quality standards, and then also kind of identifying who would be responsible for remediation.
So we're using the table or the list of what types of industries or facilities would be likely or be expected to have released PFAS or may have caused PFAS contamination. That's a question of the stakeholders as to how you'll determine who the responsible party is. There's already existing requirements for remediation and determination of a responsible party based on the wording of O2L 0100. So we'll continue to follow that just like we would normally for remediation at a site that involves Division of Waste Management. And, there's also the consideration of any background values they may have, baseline, up gradient. We'll be looking at all of the information that we can gather that they would provide to us to make that determination. Does that answer your question?
So you're going to start by looking at sites that would be suspected PFAS sources.
Yes.
And you'll look at existing monitoring wells around there.
Yes, or asking someone to do monitoring for PFAS specifically if they haven't done it before. And then based on the results we get, we'll then work toward what's, working on who's the responsible party. Also asking them to do a receptor survey right off the bat if they do have PFAS to make sure there aren't any immediate issues or needs that need to be addressed.
Great question. Any other questions for Jessica as we continue to go forward? Jessica, back to you.
Thank you. So this is a list of some of the topics of concern that we heard from the stakeholders based on their feedback, questions that they asked during the meeting or followed up after the meeting. There's also some folks that were invited that let us know they're still working on their feedback and going to get that to us soon. So there were concerns about, or questions mostly about how the standards were calculated. So, the toxicity values. So we did, after the meeting, provide them with links to the presentation that Franny Nilsson gave at the November 2023 EMC meeting. So they have a link to that information, and also, the previous meetings and other information items that we've given leading up to this meeting. To provide that information, and also let them know that the fiscal note will include an attachment that has the most updated calculations for the standards. They asked, just details on how we would be implementing the plan to address PFAS, how would we enforce the PQL, consideration, like you mentioned, of the responsible party, background, upgrading concentrations, how we would determine that if there's no baseline data, no previous or original sampling for PFAS before the waste management facility was built or established or accepted waste. There was mention of a concern about labs having the capacity for the volume of PFAS analysis they might be required to do. What would be the impact on landfills as they reach the end of post-closure care, impacts to private drinking water wells, and how contamination is determined, comparing drinking water standards versus groundwater standards, and we're reconsidering PFAS mixtures or that considerations.
Let's ask one more question. I know you have lab capacities, but if we asked a company to do testing to determine a baseline for these compounds, do we also have any requirements on the quality systems in these labs? I mean, how do we qualify that the results coming out of these labs are meaningful and accurate?
I think that it would fall back on whether a lab is required to be certified, but I'm going to look back. And yes, so Sushma Bazemore, the Assistant Secretary, the labs would be required to have some kind of certification.
Okay, thank you.
So for next steps for the O2L groundwater standards, because the feedback we got was more based on questions they wanted answered or details in the implementation, we haven't made any changes to the proposed amendments or the standards or the strategy for how we're going to develop the fiscal note necessarily, but we will look at the implementation plan that we intend to include with the fiscal note to see if we need to add any details to answer some of the questions that they were asking. And as Julie Gribb mentioned, we're also planning to hold a stakeholder meeting for environmental organizations also. So that is everything I have today.
Okay, well, this is an important, I think, yes, Commissioner Bailey?
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I was
you
just
go
saying
right
I
ahead. If
want
you
to
have
ask
any
a
questions. yes.
question.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to what Commissioner Gibson said. In terms of trying to find the sites that might have PFAS, I mean, I think of there's ongoing remediation sites and there's also landfills.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like you're going to be going to some manufacturer wondering if they have soil contamination, right? I mean, you're basically going to known sites that have monitoring in place.
Yeah, we're looking at both. We're looking at, trying to determine if there are sites that are in remediation that would be likely to have PFAS and ask them to sample. And
Right.
also landfills have already been asked in July 2023 to include PFAS in their regular monitoring for the next 2 monitoring events.
Okay, but I'm thinking like a manufacturing facility might not be asked, right?
I guess it would depend on if we know that they're releasing PFAS or generating PFAS or had the potential to have PFAS.
Oh, so you will. So
Contamination.
even if they don't have ongoing remediation or a landfill site or on site, that you still might be asking them.
Yeah, and I think we're focusing on sites that are already under our purview right now. And then, Michael, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Bailey, it's a great question. I think the example I would give, there are some production facilities where we know there's a potential that's PFAS as part of the production process or as a result of the production process. So we already have a few examples of sites where there are not active groundwater monitoring wells, where we're working collaboratively with that industry, wanting to better understand the possibility of PFAS in different media, soil, groundwater especially. So to your point, there are a few facilities where we've asked for wells to be installed, to glean that information. And it's based on known knowledge of these compounds in that type of manufacturing process or associated with that type of facility. So most of the data is coming, though, from facilities like landfills, already with environmental monitoring networks and sites like you alluded to that are already under some type of remediation where PFAS is added as an additional suite of analytes.
Great, that's exactly
But there's a
what I
little
wanted to
balance
know.
there of some sites that don't have groundwater data where we're saying, look, we're probably going to need to have this conversation about, testing groundwater for PFAS.
Great, great.
And we'll be sure to consider that in the fiscal note of, what would it cost them to have to put in wells and things like
Yeah,
that.
that should be going into it too, right?
Yes, Commissioner Gordon.
I'm still wrapping my head around the calculated standard versus PQL. Are there any of the PQLs that are indetectable by labs or standards now?
I'm sorry, ask that again.
Are there PQLs set now that are undetectable by labs
I believe
at those levels?
the PQL is meant to be the level that all labs could reliably achieve on a regular basis. So I'm not aware of there being labs that wouldn't be able to achieve it right now.
Okay. So that would be in essence, their permit requirement to remediate to that level.
Or the remediation requirement under existing rule right now.
Correct.
Any additional questions for Jessica? Yes, Commissioner Yarborough. I think Commissioner King next.
Just a question, I guess, of when you start this groundwater quality standards, are you going to be associating that with some agricultural lands as well?
I don't believe so.
Irrigation is what I'm thinking to do is.
I don't think we're looking at that yet, but I'll defer to Michael again.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Commissioner Yarborough. The agricultural facilities that I know we've dealt with in the past year have come through like with a phase one. Somebody's trying to sell a piece of property and they've had a consultant evaluate the area where fertilizers are mixed or herbicides are mixed. And they're trying to sell that property. And that's how it's come across our desk. It's not one of the facility types we've shared with the commission that we're looking at far as manufacturing or AFFF firefighting foam use. When it comes to irrigation wells, I don't know that those are, top tier facilities that we're looking at or types of locations. The farms I've seen, the past 6 months have been in a sales scenario. We've been asked to look at the phase one report because that property is changing hands or potentially changing hands, and a consultant has done some environmental sampling there.
Commissioner King?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the part of the waste in the arena of brownfields. So if we're looking at brownfields, we've been really pro at for the last 10, 12 years, and departments a great job on that. But the way I understand it, brownfields is a federal piece coming into the state.
Yeah, there's a federal brownfields program within EPA. They provide some funding to our state program, but we have a North Carolina statute or a statutory authority in our state to implement the program.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that, knowing that, how can we implement some kind of stakeholder or study with the brownfields piece? Are they going to identify PFAS as something that's going to have and to determine whether you can check off a box or not check off a box in order to get that service within the state that you've been doing? So is this going to march down the ladder to affect brownfields in the future? We're going to be able to identify those sites, and the brownfield sites we've identified, and there are some that are waiting. And is PFAS going to be a part of determining whether or not they're going to qualify or not in the future?
Right. So brownfields will incorporate, if the commission, moves this item forward, once it's proposed as an action item for standards, it will impact the brownfields program, meaning sites where we know there's a potential detection of PFAS or use of PFAS at that site previously, they would test groundwater for these standards. And I will tell you, the important response is they're already doing it.
Okay.
And the
Good.
first requirement for PFAS sampling of a brownfield site came from an external stakeholder. And I bet you can guess who it was.
Okay.
The bank, the financial
That's right.
institution
Yeah.
who was lending money on the property,
Right.
asked for the groundwater to be tested for
Sure.
PFAS. And we weren't far behind that same request, but it actually came from the lender for the developer first. So it will be a part of the brownfields evaluation process. Brownfields typically has a prohibition on the use of groundwater at a brownfield site. So if PFAS is found, I don't know that it'll be any different than another contaminant that already prohibits the
Okay.
use of groundwater. It'll be important to know if it exists, to detect it, but it may not really change how that program already limits the use of groundwater.
Thank you. That's a good explanation. Thank you.
A question, Michael, we hear a lot about biosolids. Do we anticipate the responsibility to test those biosolids coming out of municipal waste plants at the point in which it's origin versus placing that on a secondary receiver of it? I mean, how does biosolids coming out of wastewater municipal treatment plants, what's the requirement for testing since it's a obligation of the plant versus the secondary receiver of that?
I know we've got a lot of the DEQ team here. I don't know if others want to pitch in. I see our Assistant Secretary, Sushma Mazemore, is here. I'll start with DEQ. Recently conducted a very vast biosolids study that I know Sushma, our Assistant Secretary, may want to speak to. It was conducted by the Division of Water Resources. So we really needed baseline data to understand this other particular component you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, meaning biosolids and how they leave treatment plants and often end up in agronomic sectors or end up in other uses like compost. So I'll hand off to Assistant Secretary Mazemore, but we did do some recent work on studying PFAS and biosolids.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, it's really a good question. I would say it's really in the early stages of building our knowledge. As Michael mentioned, we began working with sites to sample locations and get some data as to what we're seeing across the state. Really, we're waiting for EPA's analysis, and they're actually producing a nationwide biosolids study to be done. We expect that to come out, in the near future, maybe a year or so. But a lot of states are sort of on standby while they begin to look at this holistically. It is part of our one of the sources that we know we're going to have to eventually look at, but because of the complexity with it and where that waste ends up being handled through land applications and other things, it's going to require a more coordinated and a comprehensive strategy.
Yeah, my point is, it's easy enough to go test someone who receives it and use it and hold them accountable. But I think the responsibility is on the person that generates it and the testing there.
Yeah, so it's most likely that out of what we're seeing with some of the states and where EPA is talking about, that where the biosolids is generated is where it would be most likely be tested first and examined as what are the options in avoiding the concentrated waste to be generated.
Yes. Any additional questions there? It's a very important, Commissioner Bailey.
I would just like to say that I was invited by the Cape Fear Public Utilities Commission to view their facilities, their drinking water facility, when they first installed the PFAS filter system, which I think took it out 100%. And I also visited their wastewater treatment plant. And at that time, the director told me that they were no longer allowing the biosolids to go onto farm fields, that they were collecting it and treating it as waste. And it was an additional cost to the municipality.
What county was that? What city?
New Hanover County. Sorry, I thought everybody knows what the Cape Fear Utilities Commission is.
Thank you.
No, New Hanover County. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's where, I live in New Hanover County, so I toured their facilities. And I saw the trucks where they were loading it and they said, well, we used to give it for free to the farmers, but no more.
I understand. Any additional questions in that regard? Any question broadly for Jessica? It's a very important topic. I know it's coming back again. It's not going away to our demise there, but, okay, well, thank you, Jessica. Michael, does that conclude the presentation on PFAS?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I think you have some additional items here to discuss for future events.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We're just transitioning to upcoming items. As the committee heard today, on the approval to move forward to the EMC on the periodic rule review for those 1,500 O2T rules. Those are proposed, as Jessica noted, to be packaged with the O2B and O2H and O2U rules actually tomorrow before the full commission. There'll be a 30-day waiver component to that request to be before the commission, basically the day after the committee meeting. And then after that, we do have some proposed items either for May or July of 2024. As you heard today, an informational item on PFAS groundwater quality standards. We're hopeful that'll transition to an action item at one of the upcoming meetings. And then also the request for approval to also go to the EMC on periodic rule review for our O2S rules, which include specific criteria for the administration of our dry cleaning program within the Division of Waste Management. So that concludes what we have for the future committee meetings, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll come to my Vice Chair, Gardner. Is anything we've missing here? We got it pretty well covered?
Yes, sir. I think we've got it covered.
Fantastic. Director Scott, if you have any closing comments for our meeting here?
No, just thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for your attention today on the action item and our continued discussion on PFAS. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other comments from any other member? Yes, Commissioner
I've got
Bailey.
one.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for running such a quick and efficient meeting. We're just getting out about on time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We got a great group here.
That's not to say anything against Commissioner Keene.
Yeah. Well, we said everything's about improvement. He improved a little bit from last
That's
time. We'll
right.
get him there by now. Okay, having said that, I will consider this meeting adjourned. Mr. Attorney, if that's okay with you.
Yes, sir.
Thank everyone for coming and attending, and see you again.